Today I'm going to replace the brakes on my car. I've gone ahead and jacked the car up and taken the wheel all the way off, and now I can see what I'm getting at. Obviously I have to replace the brake pads. The brake light goes off on the BMW E36 when you have to replace the brake pads. You know that's something you got to do. But when you get it opened up, you should inspect other things as well. The brake rotors can wear out, and there can be all sorts of other problems. So you just want to look and visually check it. In my case, I know that the rotor's worn out because there's this rusted part where the rotor's not even making contact with the brake pad. So that means that my rotor's obviously warped. So I'm going to replace the rotor. Now, even if your rotor's not warped or gouged, you should feel it, check for grooves or any nasty things on there. If you see anything bad like that, you'll want to replace it. Something like that, that's definitely a sign that I've got to replace this rotor. But you should also check the thickness of the rotor. The thickness will usually be stamped right on here. In this case, I believe it has to be, yes, 8.4 millimeters thick. And if it, since they do wear out and they wear thinner, if it gets thinner than that, you'll have to replace it. The other thing that I'm going to check besides just the rotors is this right here. If I grab this, just the brake caliper, I can actually move it back and forth. There's quite a bit of play in there, and that shouldn't happen. And the reason why is there's plastic, or not plastic, rubber bushings back here that the pins slide through, and if they wear out or start getting loose, this whole thing will wobble, and it's just bad news. So I'm going to replace that too. So I've looked over everything and I've seen what needs to be replaced, and I'm going to make sure that I do all of that when I replace the brake pads. You'll also need to replace the brake sensor. I'm going to undo this hinge. Now it kind of latches in here, so if I take it like this and just push it, it should just come right off. Now with that off, I'm going to go around the back here and I'm going to take the two connecting bolts that hold the caliper on. I'm going to take them off. I'm also going to have a piece of wire ready, and I'll show you that in a second. So to do that, you'll need a 7 millimeter hex Allen wrench type thing here, and I highly recommend, I've seen people do this with like a regular Allen wrench, but I highly recommend something that's a little bit stronger that you can put on a socket or something like that. Well, around the back you can see this rubber bushing and this rubber bushing, and the pins that are inside are this 7 millimeter hex bolt. You put it in right like that and you can pull it off. Now you'll find that trying to put a socket wrench on there gets in the way of the shock absorber. So I had to use a little bit of a trick here. Put that bolt in there, and then you can actually just put a wrench on that. You can also use a 10 millimeter box end wrench, typically. I'll also get the top one. There are only two. I'll do the same thing. What you may find is that you're out of threads, but it's not quite pulled all the way out. You just want to kind of put some tension on it and try and pull it out like that so that it's good and clear of everything. Do the same thing on the bottom. There we go. Pull it out there. Generally not good advice, but in this case I recommend it. And then this is where the wire comes in, because this whole thing is now free. I can pull it off, but it's still connected to the brake hose, and I don't want it hanging on the brake hose and putting pressure and possibly damaging that. So I'm going to pull it off. There we go. And I'm going to just put some wire in here, like that. And I'm going to wrap this wire around something to keep it from hanging on the brake hose. Gonna pull this out from the wire here, and this front brake pad is removed, but the back one's still there. And the reason for that is that I'm gonna put a clamp on here and push this brake cylinder all the way back in, because without that the new pads won't fit. It should go back and press in really easily, and you're just going to keep going back. With it. And notice I'm pressing against the old brake pad, and that's because I don't want to mess up the cylinder. You want to keep pressing it in until you feel it go all the way back, and you'll feel pretty sharp resistance right there. So there, I'm done. It's all the way back. It's got to be all the way back, or the new brake pads aren't going to fit on there. So with that, I can remove this, and you can see, even though it trips the brake light, they're not totally worn, and that's good, because by the time they're totally worn, pieces of this might actually break loose because it's so thin, and you'll lose your brakes altogether. You want to replace them with a little bit left, which is when the brake light comes on in your car. I'm on the right side of the car now, and I'm going to remove the brake sensor. There's only one on the one side, so that's it. I just pried it out of this brake pad, and you can see once they wear out, you're done. There's just two little metal bars, and it rubs off, and you have to replace it for it to work again. Trace it all the way back. Behind the spring here, there's a little box where it plugs in. There we go. Now, here are the new brake pads, and you can tell the difference, and you can really see that the old brake pads are very worn. Even though it looks like there's still some life left to them, it's definitely time to replace them. So here they are. You'll want to be careful to keep the surface of it clean from grease and dirt, so try not to touch that as you're installing it. You will, however, want to put a little bit of grease on the ends, basically anywhere where the metal touches. This is what causes brakes to squeal most of the time, is this sliding metal on metal. They make like special brake quiet stuff, but really just a dab of grease is basically what it is. So you just want to coat that. That snaps on there like that. Okay, with this pad installed, I'm going to go ahead, and this is for the right side only, because the brake pad wear sensor is only on the right side. This knob going up, I'm going to go ahead and slip that right in there, and then it feeds through several places. On the back here, you'll see a little cap. Then, right here, there's a second one back here, Probably can't see it, but I'm just pushing it back into the plug, and that's all of that in the box. These have rubber pads on the back that should prevent the back from squeaking, but I'm coating it in grease just to be sure. If they don't have rubber pads, you definitely want to coat it in grease, or the brake squeal or whatever, just to keep those metal parts from squealing. Alright, gonna go ahead and put that on there like that. Now with those two on, just about ready to put things back in shape. Gonna put a little bit of grease on these points too. And I'm trying to be real careful not to get the grease on the brake rotor. There we go. Lift this up. It'll be a very tight fit. There it is. There, and that's all the way in. So now I can go ahead and use my 7mm Allen wrench type bolt, and I'm going to use my trick again. 7mm bolt, 10mm box end wrench, and I'm just going to tighten these back up. Alright, I've gone ahead and tightened this down, and I'm going to put the caps, these little guys, back on my new rubber bushings. Going to just put a small little bit of grease in there, just to seal it. I'll keep it clean and nice. There we go. Same thing for the one on the bottom. And then the last thing is to reinstall the metal clip. Just put both of these on the outside here and press in, and it snaps right in place. You're all done. Now, after making these changes, this brake caliper is absolutely solid. There's almost no movement to it, so that should give me much better braking. At this point I can go ahead, put the wheel back on, and I'm done. And while these are the rear brakes on my 328/98 BMW, any disc brake is basically the same process. So the front disc brakes, essentially exactly the same, and any other car with disc brakes, if you know how to do this, you know how to do disc brakes. It's a very simple job. It's a job I feel anyone can do if you're just starting out working on your car, and you want an easy project. Go ahead and tackle it. It's a great starting project, and it shouldn't take you that long, just a couple hours to do.